Tuesday evenings were always the same for him. Come home from work, heat up some leftover pizza, and sit in front of his laptop until his eyes got tired. That's just how life had become after everything fell apart 6 months ago. The divorce papers were still sitting in a folder on his kitchen counter. Not because he needed them anymore, but because moving them felt like admitting his old life was really over. Some days he was okay with that. Other days, not so much. His small house on Pine Street was perfect for one person, 2 bedrooms, but he only used one now. The other room had become a storage space for boxes he hadn't unpacked yet. The neighbors were quiet, which he liked. After years of arguments and tension, quiet felt like a gift. 3 weeks ago, someone new moved in next door. He first noticed her when a moving truck blocked half the street. She was directing the movers with paint-stained hands, wearing old jeans and a bright yellow t-shirt. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she had this energy about her that seemed to fill up the whole street. The house next door had been empty for months. The previous owners, an elderly couple, had moved to Florida. Their yard had gotten overgrown, and the paint was starting to peel. But within days of her moving, things started changing. She planted flowers by the front steps, fixed the broken fence, even painted the mailbox a cheerful blue color. He learned her name was Lisa when the mail carrier accidentally put her letters in his box. When he knocked on her door to return them, she invited him in for coffee. Her living room was organized. Chaos. Canvases leaned against every wall, paint tubes scattered across a folding table, the smell of turpentine mixed with vanilla candles. "I'm an artist," she explained, stirring sugar into her coffee. "Still setting up my studio in the garage. Sorry about the mess." But it wasn't really a mess. It was alive. Everything in his house was neat and orderly and silent. Her house buzzed with creativity and possibility. They talked for 20 minutes that day. She asked about the neighborhood, where to get groceries, if there were any good coffee shops nearby. He found himself telling her about Murphy's Deli 3 blocks away, and how Mrs. Chen at the corner market always had the freshest vegetables. After that, they'd wave when they saw each other. Sometimes she'd be in her garage with the door open, music playing while she painted. He could hear her humming along, completely lost in her work. It was a sound he'd never heard in his own house. His routine hadn't changed much since she moved in. Up at 6:30, shower, coffee, drive to the office downtown where he spent 8 hours fixing other people's computer problems. He was good at his job, but it didn't excite him anymore. Nothing really excited him anymore. But having Lisa next door made the neighborhood feel more alive. In the mornings, he'd see her watering her flowers before he left for work. Sometimes, she'd wave and call out, "Have a good day." It was such a small thing, but it made his chest feel a little less tight. That particular Tuesday started like all the others. His alarm went off at 6:30. He hit snooze twice before getting up. Coffee was too strong again. He kept forgetting to adjust the settings on his new coffee maker. Everything was automatic now, but somehow still came out wrong. Work was the usual routine. Phone calls from people whose computers wouldn't start. Emails about software updates. A meeting about network security that could have been an email. By 5 o'clock, he was ready to go home and disappear into his laptop screen. The drive home was quiet. Traffic was light for a Tuesday. He stopped at Murphy's Deli for a sandwich, even though he had leftover pizza at home. Sometimes a change was worth the extra few dollars. When he pulled into his driveway, he noticed Lisa's car wasn't there. Her garage door was closed too, which was unusual. She usually kept it open while she worked, letting the music drift out into the evening air. He heated up the sandwich and opened his laptop on the kitchen table. Work emails were already piling up for tomorrow. A software bug that needed fixing. A client meeting to prepare for. The same cycle that never seemed to end. Around 8 o'clock, he heard something from next door. It sounded like furniture being moved around. Maybe she was rearranging her studio. Then he heard what sounded like someone saying bad words, but muffled through the walls. He paused his typing and listened. More sounds, like something heavy had fallen over. Part of him wanted to check if she was okay, but they barely knew each other. What if she thought he was being nosy? What if it was nothing? The sound stopped, so he went back to his work. But he kept glancing toward the window that faced her house. Her lights were on, but everything seemed quiet now. By 10 o'clock, his eyes were getting tired from staring at the screen. He was about to close the laptop when he heard a soft knocking sound. It was coming from his back door. His heart jumped a little. Nobody ever used his back door. It faced the small patio area between his house and Lisa's. Maybe something was wrong after all. He saved his work and walked through the kitchen toward the back door. The knocking came again, softer this time. Definitely someone who needed help. He turned on the patio light and reached for the door handle, expecting to see Lisa looking worried or upset about some household emergency. Maybe her power had gone out or she'd locked herself out of her house. But when he opened that door, his brain completely stopped working. His mind went completely blank. For what felt like forever, he just stood there staring. Lisa was standing in his doorway without any clothes on, water dripping from her hair onto his patio. But the strangest part wasn't that she was undressed. It was the look on her face. She wasn't embarrassed. She wasn't covering herself or looking away. She was looking straight at him with this confident smile, like she was waiting for him to catch up to what was happening. "Well?" she said, that grin getting bigger. "Say something." His mouth opened and closed like a fish. No words came out. His brain was trying to process too many things at once. Why was she here? What had happened? Was this really happening, or was he having some weird dream? He started, then stopped. His face felt like it was on fire. "My shower broke," she said simply, like that explained everything. "Right in the middle of washing my hair. Water everywhere. Then my hot water heater decided to quit working too. Perfect timing, right? That snapped him back to reality. She needed help. That's why she was here. This wasn't some weird situation from a movie. His neighbor had a plumbing emergency and nowhere else to turn. "Oh no," he said, finally finding his voice. "That's terrible, hold on." He rushed to his laundry room and grabbed the first towel he could find. It was one of his good ones, navy blue and still warm from the dryer. He hurried back and held it out to her, trying to look anywhere except directly at her. "Here," he said, his voice coming out higher than normal. She took the towel and wrapped it around herself like a cape. "Thanks. I know this is weird, but you're the only neighbor I actually know. The Johnsons on the other side are out of town, and I didn't want to knock on a stranger's door looking like this." "No, it's fine," he said quickly. "Come in, please, it's cold out there." She stepped into his kitchen, leaving small puddles on his clean floor. Her hair was still dripping, and she was shivering slightly despite her confident attitude. "I'm so sorry about this," she said, pulling the towel tighter. "I tried calling a plumber, but nobody answers emergency calls this late unless you want to pay double." "Don't worry about it," he said, though his heart was still racing. "Do you want some coffee or tea? Something warm?" Coffee sounds amazing. Busied himself with making coffee, grateful to have something to do with his hands. The familiar routine of measuring grounds and adding water helped calm his nerves. But he kept glancing over at Lisa, who was standing in his kitchen wrapped in his towel like it was the most natural thing in the world. "You're handling this really well," she said, watching him work. Most people would have slammed the door and called the police. He paused in scooping coffee. "Why would I do that?" "You needed help." Some men might have gotten the wrong idea. "What do you mean?" She sat down at his kitchen table, tucking the towel around her legs. "Some guys think a woman without clothes is automatically some kind of invitation, even in an emergency." He turned to look at her, really look at her face this time. Behind that confident smile, he could see something else. Vulnerability, maybe. Or past hurt. "That's awful," he said. "I would never think that." "I know," she said softly. "That's why I felt safe coming here." The coffee maker gurgled to life, filling the quiet kitchen with sound. He got 2 mugs from the cabinet, the blue ones his ex-wife had never liked. Funny how he was using them more now than he ever had when she lived here. "So what exactly happened?" he asked, pouring the coffee. Lisa laughed, and it was the first time she'd sounded a little embarrassed. It's like something from a bad movie. I was washing my hair when the shower handle just broke off in my hand. Water started spraying everywhere. I'm trying to turn it off, slipping around on the wet floor, when suddenly the water goes ice cold. The hot water heater? Dead. Completely dead. So now I've got cold water spraying all over my bathroom, soap in my hair, and no way to rinse it out. I managed to turn off the main water valve, but by then my bathroom looked like a swimming pool. He handed her a mug of coffee, making sure to keep his eyes on her face. That sounds like a nightmare. The worst part is I just got that bathroom renovated last month. New tiles, new paint, everything. Now it's all ruined. She took a sip of coffee and closed her eyes. This is really good, thank you. You're welcome. He sat down across from her, wrapping his hands around his own mug. What can I do to help? Honestly, just letting me sit here until I figure out my next move is enough. I called my landlord, but he's not answering. I guess I'll have to find a hotel for tonight. A hotel? For a broken shower? Where else am I going to sleep? My bathroom is flooded and I don't have hot water. Plus, all my clothes are wet from trying to clean up the mess. He thought about this for a moment. It seemed silly for her to pay for a hotel when he had a perfectly good guest room upstairs. But asking her to stay the night felt like crossing some invisible line between neighbors. What time do plumbers usually start working? He asked. 8 or 9 in the morning, I think. If I can find one who's not booked up for weeks. I might know someone who can help with that. She raised an eyebrow. Really? My buddy Jake runs a small plumbing business. He's reliable and honest. I can call him first thing tomorrow. For the first time since she'd appeared at his door, Lisa's confident mask slipped completely. Her shoulders relaxed and her smile became genuine instead of brave. You would do that for me? Of course. That's what neighbors do. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both drinking their coffee. The whole situation was completely crazy, but somehow it didn't feel awkward anymore. It felt like two people helping each other through an unexpected crisis. I have a washer and dryer, he said suddenly. If you want to wash your clothes, that would be incredible, but I don't have anything to wear while they're washing. He felt his face getting warm again. I could lend you something, a sweatshirt and some sweatpants. They'll be too big, but you would trust me with your clothes? Why, wouldn't I? She stared at him for a long moment like she was trying to figure out if he was real. Most people aren't this kind to strangers, she said quietly. You're not a stranger, you're my neighbor, and neighbors help each other. Something shifted in the air between them. Not romantic exactly, but deeper than just neighborly politeness. Like they were seeing each other clearly for the first time. Well, Lisa said, that grin returning. Are you going to show me where that washer and dryer are? An hour later, they were sitting in his living room having the strangest conversation of his life. Lisa was wearing his old college sweatshirt and a pair of his sweatpants, both way too big for her. She'd rolled up the sleeves and legs and somehow made his baggy clothes look stylish. Her wet clothes were tumbling around in his dryer, making that rhythmic thumping sound that usually annoyed him. Tonight it felt comforting, like his quiet house had suddenly come alive. I have to ask, he said, settling into his favorite chair. Why weren't you embarrassed? About showing up at my door like that? Lisa tucked her legs under herself on his couch. You really want to know? I'm curious, yeah. She was quiet for a moment, staring into her coffee mug. When she looked up, her expression was more serious than he'd seen all evening. When I was in art school, we had to do these life drawing classes, where models pose without clothes so students can practice drawing the human form. He nodded, not sure where this was going. The first time I had to model for one of those classes, I was terrified. I kept thinking everyone would judge me or laugh or make it weird somehow. But you know what happened? What? Nothing. Everyone just focused on their work. They saw me as a person doing a job, not as something to be ashamed of. That's when I realized shame is something we create in our own heads most of the time. She took a sip of coffee before continuing. After my divorce 2 years ago, I decided I was done being ashamed of things that weren't actually shameful. Life's too short to spend it worried about what other people think. You were married? For 4 years. To someone who spent most of that time trying to make me feel embarrassed about who I was. My art was too messy. I laughed too loud. I was too direct, too honest, too much of everything. Her voice got quieter. He made me feel like I should apologize for existing. Something heavy settled in his chest. He knew that feeling. The constant sense that you were doing everything wrong, that you needed to be smaller, quieter, different. My ex-wife used to do that too, he heard himself say. Not about the same things, but she had this way of making me feel like I was always disappointing her just by being myself. Lisa looked at him with understanding in her eyes. What kinds of things? Everything, really. I wasn't ambitious enough because I liked my boring tech job instead of starting my own company. I wasn't social enough because I preferred quiet evenings, at home to big parties. I wasn't interesting enough because I'd rather read a book than go to art galleries or wine tastings. He'd never said any of this out loud before. Not to his friends, not to his family, not even to himself, really. She made you feel like your preferences were wrong, Lisa said. It wasn't a question. Exactly. By the end, I didn't even know what I actually liked anymore. I was so busy trying to be the person she wanted that I lost track of who I was. And now, he looked around his living room. It was decorated exactly how he wanted it. Comfortable furniture, warm lighting, books everywhere, his collection of old movie posters on the walls. Nothing fancy or impressive, just him. Now I'm remembering, he said. Slowly. That's the best thing about divorce, Lisa said with a small smile. Getting to discover yourself again. I started painting completely different things after mine was final. Brighter colors, bolder shapes. Turns out I'd been making art to please someone else for years without even realizing it. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Outside, a car drove past, its headlights briefly illuminating the window. The dryer was still running, counting down the minutes until Lisa would have to go back to her flooded house. Can I tell you something? Lisa said suddenly. When I was standing at your door earlier, I wasn't just confident because of my philosophy about shame. No? I was also terrified. What if you thought I was crazy? What if you slammed the door? What if you called the police like I joked about? I almost turned around and went back to my house 3 times. But you didn't. No, I didn't. Because sometimes you have to choose between being scared and being stuck. I needed help and hiding wasn't going to get me any. He thought about this. How many times had he chosen being scared over taking action? How many opportunities had he missed because asking for help felt too risky? I admire that, he said. The courage to ask for what you need. You have that same courage. You just don't realize it yet. What do you mean? You invited a stranger into your house in the middle of the night. You offered help without asking for anything in return. You shared your coffee, your clothes, your washer and dryer. You even offered to call your friend, the plumber. She leaned forward slightly. Most people would have given me a towel and told me to call someone else, but you didn't hesitate to help. That's just basic human decency. No, it's not. Trust me, I've met plenty of people who wouldn't have done what you did tonight. You have a kind heart, and you're not afraid to show it. That takes courage. He felt something warm spread through his chest. When was the last time someone had seen good qualities in him? When was the last time someone had made him feel like he was enough, exactly as he was? The dryer buzzed, signaling that Lisa's clothes were done. Neither of them moved to get them. I should probably head back soon, Lisa said, but she didn't sound like she wanted to. You could stay, he said, then immediately felt his face get hot. I mean in the guest room, if you want. Instead of dealing with your flooded bathroom tonight. She looked surprised. Are you sure? That's a lot to ask of someone you barely know. We're not strangers anymore, he said, echoing her words from earlier. And it makes more sense than you trying to sleep in a house with no hot water and a wet bathroom. What will the neighbors think? He almost laughed. After everything they'd talked about tonight, she was worried about gossip. The neighbors will think I helped someone in an emergency, he said. And if they think anything else, that says more about them than it does about us. Lisa smiled, and this time it was soft and grateful instead of bold and challenging. Okay, she said, if you're really sure it's not too much trouble. It's not trouble. It's what neighbors do for each other. Well, she said, standing up and smoothing down his oversized sweatshirt, are you going to show me to this guest room? But as he led her upstairs, he realized something had changed. The guest room didn't feel like just a place to store boxes anymore. His house didn't feel like a lonely place where he hid from the world. For the first time in months, it felt like a home where people took care of each other, and that was worth more than all the hot water and working showers in the world. 2 weeks had passed since that strange Tuesday night, and everything felt different. Not dramatically different like in the movies where someone's whole life changes overnight. More like when you clean your glasses and suddenly realize how blurry everything had been before. Jake the plumber had fixed Lisa's shower the next morning just like he'd promised. The hot water heater took 2 days to replace, but Lisa stayed in her own house after that first night. Still, something had shifted between them that couldn't be undone. Their morning routine had changed without either of them planning it. He'd started making his coffee a few minutes earlier so he could water his plants on the front porch. She'd started working in her garden before breakfast. They'd wave to each other across the fence, sometimes calling out comments about the weather or asking how each other's day was going. It seemed like such a small thing, but it made leaving for work feel less lonely somehow. The bigger changes were harder to explain. At the office, his coworker Mike noticed it first. "You seem different lately," Mike said during their lunch break. "More relaxed or something?" He'd been debugging the same piece of code for 3 hours without getting frustrated once. Usually technical problems made him tense and irritable. Today he just worked through it calmly, taking breaks to look out the window and think. "Different how?" he asked. "I don't know. You're smiling more. You actually talked to Jennifer from accounting yesterday instead of just nodding when she said hello, and you haven't complained about your workload once this week." Mike was right, though he hadn't realized it until now. Work felt more manageable lately, not because anything had changed about his job, but because he wasn't carrying around that heavy feeling all the time. The feeling that he was somehow failing at life. "Maybe I'm just sleeping better," he said, which was true. He'd been falling asleep easier since that night with Lisa. Less time lying awake wondering what he was doing wrong. Whatever it is, keep it up. You seem more like yourself. More like himself. That was an interesting way to put it. The changes showed up in small ways throughout his days. He'd started listening to music during his commute instead of news radio. Music felt better, lighter. He'd bought fresh flowers at the grocery store last weekend just because they looked nice. He couldn't remember the last time he'd bought something just because it made him happy. Last Thursday, he'd even called his sister Amy for the first time in 2 months. She'd been surprised to hear from him. "You sound good," she'd said. "Really? Good. What's been going on?" "Nothing special, just regular life stuff." "Regular life stuff doesn't usually make you sound this happy. Come on, tell me what's different." He'd thought about mentioning Lisa, but how could he explain it? That his neighbor had shown up at his door during an emergency, and somehow that had reminded him how to be a decent human being? That helping someone else had made him remember he was worth helping too? "I think I'm just figuring some things out," he'd said instead. "About what?" "About who I am when I'm not trying to be someone else." Amy had gone quiet for a moment. She'd never liked his ex-wife, though she'd tried to be supportive during the marriage. "I'm proud of you," she'd said finally. "It takes courage to start over." Meanwhile, he'd been watching Lisa go through her own changes. Her art was different. Lately, bolder, more colorful. She'd started leaving her garage door open during the day, music playing while she painted. Sometimes people would stop to watch her work, and she'd wave at them like it was the most natural thing in the world. Last weekend, she'd asked if he wanted to help her hang a new piece in her front window. It was a painting of 2 coffee cups on a kitchen table, surrounded by warm yellow light. "It's from that night," she'd explained as they positioned it in the window. "I kept thinking about how safe I felt in your kitchen, how easy it was to just be myself." "It's beautiful," he'd said, and meant it. I'm thinking about entering it. In the summer art fair downtown. What do you think? I think you should. People need to see work like this. She'd looked at him with surprise. You really think it's good enough? Lisa, it's amazing. It makes me feel something just looking at it. That evening, she'd knocked on his front door with a bottle of wine and a pizza. What's this for? He'd asked. Celebrating. I submitted 3 paintings to the art fair today, including the coffee cup one. They'd eaten pizza on his back patio, talking about everything and nothing. Lisa told him about her dreams of having her own gallery someday. He found himself telling her about an idea he'd had for starting a small consulting business, something he'd never mentioned to anyone before. Why haven't you done it? She'd asked. I guess I never thought I was ready, or good enough. Those are just stories we tell ourselves to stay safe, she'd said, but safe isn't always better. 3 days later, he'd scheduled a meeting with a small business advisor, not to commit to anything, just to learn what would be involved. It felt scary and exciting at the same time. The neighborhood itself seemed different too. Mrs. Peterson from 2 houses down had started waving when she saw him. The teenage boy who lived across the street had asked him for help jumping his car battery. Small interactions that made the whole street feel more connected. You know what I think happened? Lisa said one evening as they sat on his front steps sharing a bag of popcorn. What? I think we gave each other permission to be authentic. You showed me that kindness without conditions actually exists. I showed you that asking for help doesn't make you weak. He thought about this. It was true that he'd stopped feeling guilty about his preferences. He liked quiet evenings and simple pleasures. He liked helping people solve problems. He liked routine, but not rigid routine. He liked making coffee for friends and listening to their dreams. I feel more like myself than I have in years, he said. Me too. It's like that night broke some kind of spell we were both under. What kind of spell? The spell that makes you think you have to earn your place in the world, that you have to be someone else to deserve good things. A car drove by and the driver waved. They waved back automatically. The whole street feels friendlier lately, Lisa said. Have you noticed? He had noticed. Maybe we're just paying more attention. Or maybe when you start being genuine with people, it spreads somehow. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set behind the houses across the street. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, new opportunities to choose courage over fear. But tonight, sitting on his front steps with his friend and neighbor, everything felt exactly as it should be. Well, Lisa said with that familiar grin. Ready to see what happens next? And for the first time in a long time, he honestly was. 6 months later, the street looked completely different, not because anything major had changed, but because of 100 small improvements that had happened gradually. Lisa's front garden was in full bloom. The Petersons had painted their fence. The teenager across the street had organized a neighborhood cleanup day that actually brought people together, instead of just making them complain about each other. He was standing in his driveway on a Saturday morning watching Lisa position something large and metallic in her front yard. She'd been working on this sculpture for 2 months, welding pieces together in her garage while he helped by holding things steady and bringing her cold drinks. A little more to the left, she called out, stepping back to get a better view. He pushed the base of the sculpture slightly. It was taller than both of them, made of curved metal pieces that seemed to flow together like water. In the morning, sunlight, it cast interesting shadows on the grass. Perfect, Lisa said, wiping her hands on her jeans. What do you think? He walked around it slowly, taking in how it looked from different angles. The metal was polished in some places and rough in others, creating a pattern of light and texture that changed as you moved. It's incredible, he said. What are you going to call it? The courage to ask. It's about vulnerability and strength, about how sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit you need help. He understood immediately. The sculpture had smooth, flowing lines that looked graceful and strong at the same time. It reminded him of that night 6 months ago when Lisa had stood in his doorway, scared, but determined to ask for what she needed. The neighbors are going to love it, he said. I hope so. The City Arts Council is coming by next week to look at it. They're thinking about commissioning more public art for the neighborhood. Lisa's art career had taken off in ways neither of them had expected. The summer art fair had been a huge success. She'd sold all 3 paintings she'd entered, and 2 galleries had asked to see more of her work. She was still living next door and working from her garage, but now she had a waiting list of customers and more confidence than he'd ever seen in her. His own changes had been just as dramatic, but in a quieter way. The consulting business he'd started 3 months ago was already busier than he'd hoped. Turns out there were a lot of small businesses that needed technical help, but couldn't afford big consulting firms. He was making the same money he'd made at his old job, but working from home and choosing his own projects. More importantly, he was enjoying his work again. Solving problems for people who actually appreciated his help felt completely different from fixing the same issues over and over at a big corporation. "Coffee?" Lisa asked, gesturing toward his house. "I brought bagels." This had become their Saturday morning tradition. Coffee on his back patio while they planned their weekends and caught up on their weeks. Sometimes other neighbors joined them. Mrs. Peterson had started stopping by with her famous cinnamon rolls. The teenager, whose name turned out to be Danny, sometimes asked for advice about college applications. His quiet back patio had become an unofficial community gathering spot, and he loved it. They settled into their usual chairs with steaming mugs and fresh bagels. The morning was warm but not too hot, with a light breeze that made Lisa's wind chimes sing softly. "I have news," Lisa said, trying to hide a smile. "Good news or interesting news?" "Both. The gallery downtown wants to give me a solo show in the fall, 3 months of just my work on display." He nearly choked on his coffee. "Lisa, that's amazing. That's huge." "I know, right? I keep thinking they're going to call and say they made a mistake." "They didn't make a mistake. You're incredibly talented." She beamed at him. "I want you to help me choose which pieces to include. You have good instincts about what connects with people." "I'd be honored to help." They sat quietly, for a moment both thinking about how much had changed since that strange Tuesday night. "I have news too," he said. "Danny's mom asked if I'd be interested in teaching a computer skills class at the community center, for adults who want to learn but feel intimidated by technology." "That sounds perfect for you. You're so patient when you explain things." "I think I want to do it. It would be 1 evening a week, and it feels like a way to give back to the neighborhood. Plus, you're really good at making complicated things feel simple." He thought about this. 6 months ago, he would have said no immediately. Too much trouble, too far outside his comfort zone. What if he wasn't good at teaching? Now those fears seemed less important than the possibility of helping people. "Speaking of giving back," Lisa said, "Mrs. Peterson wants to organize a block party for Labor Day. She asked if we'd help plan it. What would that involve?" "The usual stuff. Food, music, maybe some games for the kids." Danny said he'd help set up tables and chairs. A year ago, the idea of organizing a neighborhood party would have terrified him. All those people to coordinate, with all those things that could go wrong, but now it sounded like fun. "Let's do it," he said. "Really? Really? This street has given us both so much. It's time to celebrate that." Lisa raised her coffee mug. "To new beginnings." "To new beginnings," he echoed, clinking his mug against hers. A car drove by and the driver waved at them. They waved back automatically, the way neighbors do when they genuinely like each other. "Can I tell you something?" Lisa said, settling back in her chair. "Always. That night when I showed up at your door, I was really hoping you'd turn out to be a good person. I was taking a huge risk, trusting a stranger like that. What made you think I might be trustworthy?" "Little things. The way you always picked up mail that blew into your yard and put it back in the right mailboxes. How you shoveled Mrs. Peterson's sidewalk after it snowed, even though she never asked. The fact that you actually waved back when I waved instead of just pretending not to see me. He'd never thought of those things as particularly meaningful. They were just what you did when you lived somewhere. Those are just normal neighbor things," he said. "No, they're not. They're kind person things. Not everyone does them." She leaned forward slightly. "I knew that if you were willing to help an elderly neighbor you barely knew, you'd probably help me too, even in a weird emergency situation." I'm glad you took that risk. Me too. It changed both our lives. They finished their coffee as the neighborhood slowly woke up around them. Kids started playing in yards. People emerged to water plants or walk dogs. Danny waved from across the street where he was washing his car. Well, Lisa said, standing up and stretching. Ready to go look at the sculpture from the street? I want to see how it looks from a distance. They walked to the edge of his driveway and turned back to look at her front yard. The sculpture caught the morning light beautifully, its curves creating shadows that shifted as clouds moved overhead. It's perfect, he said. It fits the neighborhood perfectly. It should. It was, inspired by the neighborhood, by what happens when people choose to trust each other instead of staying closed off. A small group of morning joggers had stopped to admire the sculpture. Lisa waved at them, and they waved back before continuing on their run. I think it's going to make people smile every time they pass by, he said. That's all I wanted. Something that reminds people that beautiful things can come from unexpected moments. They stood there for a few more minutes watching their street come alive with weekend activity. Everything felt settled and right, like pieces of a puzzle finally fitting together the way they were meant to. Well, Lisa said with that familiar grin, the same one she'd worn that first night. Say something. But this time, he didn't freeze up or struggle for words. He simply smiled and said what was in his heart. Thank you. For what? For having the courage to knock on my door. For showing me that helping people is what makes life worth living. For being the kind of friend who makes everything better just by existing. Lisa's eyes got a little misty. Thank you for opening the door, and for seeing me as a person who needed help instead of a problem to be solved. That's what neighbors do for each other. The best neighbors, anyway. And as they walked back toward the house to plan their weekend, he realized that this was exactly the life he'd been hoping for without knowing it. Not perfect, but real. Not easy, but worthwhile. Not lonely, but full of the kind of connections that make a place feel like home.